Ed Oliver is starting to turn it on at Buffalo Bills training camp. We're going to break down what Coach McDermott said about him and more today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. As a reminder, we are free and available to you on all platforms. And I reluctantly said Tuesday there because I'm going to drop this podcast on Monday afternoon to get the information to you as soon as possible. But inevitably, somebody's going to send me a message and say, Joe, it's not Tuesday. So thank you for that reminder, but this will serve as the Tuesday podcast that I am dropping for you on Monday afternoon because there's no reason to wait on the intel, right? I don't want to wait on it. I don't want to sit on it. I've got the information. Let's produce the pod. So that's what we're doing here today. And so we're going to reflect on the biggest training camp takeaways from the Bills practice on Monday morning, August 1st. What we learned. Sean McDermott spoke to the media. He said a few things that I found to be interesting. And then I want to dig into some of the practice takeaways. And then I want to get to the herd mentality questions I said I didn't have time for yesterday. So Chris, Tom, Michael, Mike, we are going to get to your stuff at the end of the podcast today. So let's start with some newsy updates. Dion Dawkins, the Bills' left tackle, returned to practice on Monday. And it sounded like, he was right back into his usual self. Apparently, he caught a tipped ball and ran it for a touchdown and did a somersault into the end zone. So the typical high-energy Dion Dawkins appeared to be back in practice on Monday after missing a couple days due to personal reasons. Tim Settle, the Bills' defensive tackle, he did not practice on Monday with groin soreness. Jamison Crowder was back in a limited capacity on Monday, which is important if he's going to present any type of meaningful competition for Isaiah McKenzie. He needs to get out there and practice. Micah Hyde, full pads, which is great news. And, he had the scare on Friday, and we got some information over the weekend that he was day-to-day with some hip and glute soreness, and he's back out there in full pads on Monday. So that was very quickly moved through when it comes to Micah Hyde working back from that little scare on Friday. Then during practice, it sounded like the only guy that had any injuries was Tommy Doyle. Sounds like he was okay, but limped off the field at some point. But all indications are that Tommy Doyle is good to go. So let's get into these comments made by Coach McDermott before the practice on Monday. There's 4 different things that he said that I found particularly interesting. Starting with the offensive line, where he was asked about just not being able to get their preferred 5 guys out there at this point. And Coach McDermott said, we'd love to have them out there for as many reps as possible, but almost always you have injuries during the first 2 weeks of camp. There's always a spike, and the silver lining is that there's opportunity for other players to step in. And so we kind of know some of that, right? Like, of course, while your players are out, that means other guys get a chance to come in and you get new exposures and you can potentially uncover some things that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to do if your normal players were in. But obviously you'd prefer to have your preferred starting 5 working together at this point in the season. But Coach McDermott said, look, there's always a little spike in injuries the first 2 weeks of camp. And I think that was the good reminder. And I feel like every year I kind of find myself in this little spot where I'm nervous about guys not being able to get the reps in practice that I think they need, but it's a good reminder that guys are ramping up. There's going to be some nicks and bumps along the way. It's okay. The season doesn't start for several more weeks. So the important thing isn't being ready to play a game today. It's important to be able to play that game in September, week 1 against the Los Angeles Rams. So there's still plenty of time, but I do want to see these guys start to get back and gel together. regarding Ed Oliver, and I want to spend some time here, and we'll get to some of the takeaways later on in the podcast because it sounds like he had an awesome practice on Monday. But Coach McDermott, before the practice, said this about Ed Oliver. He said he gets better every year with his approach and attention to detail. He has a year-round approach, and it's natural for players in their developing years 2, 3, and 4, to kind of gain that yearly calendar for how to prepare for a season. Coach said that Ed Oliver came to camp in shape and hungry. And what's interesting to me here is just him complimenting Ed on how he's developed the right habits during the offseason to allow him to come in a good space physically and mentally. And I think that any player or anybody in any job, you kind of learn the nuances and you develop your approach and the right way to attack what you're responsible for. And I think it's encouraging that Ed Oliver kind of getting to that point where we start to talk about contract extension, obviously a big year for him this season. It's good to hear that the parts of being a football player that's going to make you consistently great, which is your preparation and how you get ready for a season, right? You can have talent, but if you don't prepare, if you don't have habits to go with the talent, well, then you're going to be an inconsistent player. Sounds like Ed Oliver is on a very good trajectory right now, and obviously all the reports so far during camp have been really favorable. Sounds like he was awesome on Monday, and we really liked how he turned it on last season. So I for one, find myself in a place of excitement when it comes to Ed Oliver in 2022. Coach McDermott did comment on the Josh Allen scuffle from the Saturday practice, and he said, you never want the quarterback involved in that. Guys are competitors. We would rather have to tone it down than ask them to ramp up the intensity. There's a delicate balance there, particularly with the quarterback involved. So I think Sean McDermott said what you would expect him to say there. But what I think is really interesting is I've had a little bit more time to think about the way people responded to Josh Allen in the scuffle. And, certainly Dolphins, Patriots, and Jets fans couldn't wait to make it like the Bills were imploding. The reality is the Bills were like the first team in the league to have their pads on. For the rest of teams, pads came on Monday. The Bills had them on Saturday. So they hadn't had those opportunities for those scuffles within their own teams to happen. And they're going to come. They're going to happen. It's going to start. And people are going to look silly for saying the Bills were imploding when their football team is putting the pads on today, and they're going to start getting a little chippy too. Well, are they imploding, or is it just normal stuff that happens in football practice? Coach McDermott commented on Isaiah McKenzie. He said the biggest adjustment is stepping into a full-time role. That's pretty significant, right? The biggest adjustment for Isaiah McKenzie is stepping into a full-time role and teams planning for him. There will be more film out there. Teams are keying on you, and there's more chances for good and bad plays. Just feels like the stock is up for Isaiah McKenzie. And Coach McDermott literally coming out and saying he's stepping into a full-time role. And we know that he hasn't been a full-time piece of this offense, right? Kind of sprinkled in, somewhat of a gadgety player, certainly filled in and did well at times, but for the most part, very much a down the pecking order guy when it comes to opportunity to make plays. So for Coach McDermott to come out and acknowledge that he's stepping into a full-time role says a lot about where he's at. But also it's good for us to keep in mind, and I've said this about Gabriel Davis, I've said this about Tim Settle, that you have to turn the flashes in a smaller role into consistency in a larger role. And that happens differently for all kinds of different players, right? There's an adjustment. Like we've said, teams are going to be planning for you. They're going to play you differently. There's more tape out there. And so you have to continue to evolve and get yourself into the chess match a little bit with how you're going to counter what teams are doing, what new problems they're presenting to you as a player. And so that's going to be a big thing with guys like Isaiah McKenzie and Gabriel Davis and Tim Settle and any player that's about to ramp up their opportunity with his football team. Showcasing yourself with consistency over a bigger sample size is really important, and you just never know how guys are actually going to respond to that. If you haven't tried Built Puffs yet, then you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. You ready for this? It's delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to their new favorite flavor, cookie dough chunk puffs. They have a light, chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, covered in 100% real chocolate. All the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. They're low sugar, and they are low calorie. They're super good for you. They're super tasty. I've had them. They're awesome. Check them out for yourself. Go to Built.com. Use our promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. So let's talk about the big takeaways from practice on Monday. And this is just kind of me looking through different reports and tweets and social media posts about what happened in practice and sharing what I found to be the most interesting things. Well, first of all, Bobby Hart got first-team reps at left guard. So there's your consequence of Tommy Doyle having to step out. Bobby Hart gets some opportunity. I think this is like the fifth different player that has received first-team reps at left guard. So you've had Cody Ford, you've had Greg Manns, you've had Bobby Hart, you've had Tommy Doyle, you've had David Quessenberry. Get well soon, Roger Saffold. Get well soon. Thad Brown brought up that Ed Oliver was dominant. And he mentioned that Sean McDermott actually yanked the first-team defensive line because the offense couldn't function at one point. And you saw Ed Oliver and Von Miller playing off each other really well. And it sounds like the Bills were having Von Miller attack some of the A-gaps and really create a ton of interior pressure. Matt Bove said that Ed Oliver is playing out of his mind today. A lot of positivity for Ed Oliver. And like we mentioned at the beginning, and that's why I started with that, was just getting Coach McDermott's comments out there about the mindset and the approach and what he's done to get ready for this season and how we're seeing that manifest itself and how he's performing on the practice field. And then certainly a lot of hope for how that translates into the regular season and the impact that he can make. But if you get a better version of Ed Oliver to go with a Von Miller, you have a couple guys on this defensive line that can really, really make a difference. And those two guys playing off of each other is really exciting. You heard Mitch Morse, the Bills center, say it's unfair when they're both on the field at the same time. So you guys know I love the defensive line. But we hadn't seen this type of collection of talent yet for Sean McDermott. There's been good players, but Ed Oliver coming into his prime, Von Miller with the career he's had with these young players in a Rousseau and a Basham and an Epinesa to go with better defensive tackles. Folks, I am excited for this Bills defensive line, and I'm excited to hear about how it's impacting practices. Now, the flip side of that is that the offensive lines are not doing so hot. And there's other teams out there with good defensive lines, and they're going to be challenged. But for now, you have to really be excited about this Bills defensive line, especially how Ed Oliver appears to be primed to make a big-time impact on this defense. Thought this was really interesting. Thad Brown said that Christian Benford, Bills rookie day 3 pick, corner out of Villanova, got first-team reps on Monday. You wouldn't expect to hear that. Maybe it's just giving him a look, giving him an opportunity, seeing what it's like. But I thought that was interesting. Matty Glab noted that he had an interception, so at least he made a play on the ball. I wonder where he was playing. Who was not in the starting lineup that Christian Benford came in for? We don't know. It could be corner. It could be safety. But I'd be curious to know who he stepped in for. But he I don't think the Bills would give him an opportunity he wouldn't have earned. And so I found that to be interesting. Sounds like Tremaine Edmonds made an awesome interception. Went way up in the air to pick off Josh Allen. Matt Marino said that he thinks Tremaine Edmonds could dunk on a 13-foot goal, basketball goal, based on how high he had to elevate to pick off the pass from Josh Allen. And that's part of the impact we talk about with a Tremaine Edmonds. And you go back to the podcast that I did several weeks ago, just really focusing in specifically on Tremaine Edmonds, 35 minutes of me just talking Tremaine and what he brings to the team. And that's an example of it, right? It's that size and athleticism in the middle of the field and how he can impact the way a quarterback is going to choose to make decisions against this Bills defense, because that skill set is able to take a lot of throws off the menu. And when he starts coming away with interceptions, that's when it starts to get really exciting. And Tremaine's had a lot of opportunities at interceptions throughout his career that he didn't finish the play. And so I think that's part of the evolution of Tremaine is like, hey, dude, when those chances are there, you got to make the play. So I was encouraged to hear about this highlight reel interception of Josh Allen in practice. We're starting to get more and more positivity for Kaiir Elam and how he's competing. And it never has sounded like the moment has been too big for him. He's always been tough and competitive and preparing and putting in the time. But it's starting to feel like the results are starting to happen there, where you're hearing more about him having good reps against Diggs and Davis, right? As opposed to early in camp, it was, well, hey, Kaiir Elam's competing, but, these guys are getting the best of him. So it's been really kind of neat to see the evolution of those recaps on Kaiir Elam and them kind of showcasing him more as a guy that's holding his own out there. And you heard from him after practice on Monday, and it sounds like he's just in a really mature place, and sounds like he's putting in a lot of work with Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde and doing everything he can to put himself in position to help the team. And obviously there's high hopes for Kaiir Elam as a first-round pick, traded up a little bit to get him. But the trajectory and how the conversation is shifting is starting to get into a place where you're gaining more and more comfort. Now I'm excited to see it with my own eyes next week. I'll be at practice next week on Wednesday and Thursday, and I'll be at the Colts game on Saturday. So I'm excited to get my own eyes on this, but I like the trajectory of the reports. You also had good reports on O.J. Howard, which, my goodness, we needed to hear that. Dan Feets gave him a stock up emoji in his Twitter recap, I guess, of practice. Sounds like Josh Allen made a nice throw to him across the middle of the field, getting on the same page a little bit more. It's the first positive anything we've heard about O.J. Howard, so it was nice. It was nice to see several different people in attendance have something good to say about O.J. Howard after what felt like, going back to OTAs, just not a whole lot of nice things about the way O.J. Howard's looked on the field. So it looks like we've maybe turned the corner a little bit. We're looking for this to become a trend. That's important, but at least we're changing the narrative a little bit for today. The last thing that I'll say from practice before we get into the herd mentality questions is Matt Marino noted that Matt Araiza had a perfect practice as Tyler Bass's holder. That's what we want to see. That's what we want to see. Like I've said with this punter competition, what did the Bills have to trade off? And if Matt Araiza can give the Bills some really high-level punts with some inconsistency, that's to be expected, but really doesn't represent much of a drop-off from the holder side of things, you start to feel a lot better about his ability to lock down this job and provide the Bills with hopefully a long-term answer at punter. But it really feels like that's a conversation that's heading in the right direction at this point in time. All right, let's get into a few herd mentality questions. I wish I had time for more, but these kind of stood out to me as timely topics and things that I think people would have a lot of interest in. This first one comes from Chris, who says, on previous podcasts, you have mentioned how using the franchise tag on Tremaine Edmonds when he hits free agency in 2023 is an unrealistic option because the franchise tag does not differentiate between inside linebackers and rush/edge outside linebackers. I'm curious if you can further elaborate on if using the franchise tag on some of the other Bills' future pending free agents in the next couple of seasons is a realistic option or not. I'm specifically asking about Jordan Poyer and Dawson Knox in 2023, as well as potentially Ed Oliver and Gabriel Davis in 2024. So this is a really good topic, and I want to give you the numbers for all of those players, but I'm going to give you the projected franchise tag amounts for 2023 and understand that the 2024 guys and Ed Oliver and Gabriel Davis, it'll be a little bit higher, right? Because it's going to take into account a different set of top salaries that are inevitably going to be a little bit more. So for the 2023 guys, this coming off season, Jordan Poyer, if the Bills were to franchise tag Jordan Poyer, you're looking at $13.9 million, so $14 million. For Dawson Knox, $12.5 million. And I'll give you this one just for the heck of it. Devin Singletary, because he's an expiring contract, $13 million. Predictively, I don't really see any of that happening. Maybe Dawson Knox. I think he would be the most likely player to get the franchise tag. If he stacks together another good season and the Bills can't figure out the long-term play here, that would be an option. But the problem with the franchise tag, and this is something that you've heard Brandon Beane talk about, is that you're pretty much just locked in 1 year for that amount of money. That doesn't give you any flexibility to spread money around and structure it in a way that helps the team. And so I think you would see a reluctance from Brandon Beane to ever use the franchise tag. He hadn't done it yet, right? He's been the GM for since 2017. He hasn't applied the franchise tag. He hasn't had to. But I think more so than anything, he doesn't like the lack of flexibility that it gives you with the player. And so maybe he would do it to buy time and control. But I think based on what we've learned about Brandon Beane, he's always going to be a little reluctant to pull the trigger on the franchise tag. Now, looking at the 2024 guys, Gabriel Davis, $20 million, Ed Oliver, $18 million. Same deal. I would find that to be pretty unlikely for him to use those franchise tags, but it is good for us to know the numbers. Tom says, I just read a Jerry Sullivan article in which he made season predictions. I don't like doing that. I look to the next game and hope we win. That's as far as I go. I think our team looks great, but staying healthy is probably the key. I watched a video of Daquan Jones, and he's so huge it looks like he's wearing pads. The 13-second debacle may have been the impetus in all the changes. Had we won the game, which we absolutely should have, I don't think Von Miller would be on the team. I don't know that he would have been able to draft Elam and Cook or any of the others. In the long run, the 13-second debacle and the consequences thereof may lead to more prosperity than had we won the Super Bowl. Would I rather have won the Super Bowl? Of course. I pray that they will win while Marv Levy is still with us. Seeing him at the podium at the parade would make me cry like a baby. I will be there for sure. I appreciate where you took this take, Tom. I do. First of all, I think we can all acknowledge that we would have taken the Super Bowl win last year over anything, right? You can keep Von Miller. You can keep Kyrie Elam. You can keep James Cook. Keep whatever you want. If the Bills won the Super Bowl last year, I'm good. I don't need a whole lot else. But maybe that is a silver lining where the Bills kind of proving themselves as who they are as a team, and Josh Allen validating himself as a tier 1 elite NFL quarterback could lead to even more prosperity, like you said. I mean, the Bills roster right now is stacked. I've said it repeatedly. It's the best group Sean McDermott's had. And we didn't expect that to be the case, right? Bills went into last offseason over the cap, picking late in every single round, and somehow came away with a markedly better roster than they had last year. So, you ever heard the phrase bird in hand's better than two in the bush, right? I'll take the Super Bowl that we had, but I certainly will cling to your silver lining point here that, hey, maybe this leads to even more prosperity than had the Bills just won it last year. Now, we still got to get that damn Super Bowl. I'll tell you that. Michael says, I've been extremely encouraged with the reports regarding Siran Neal and how he has looked thus far in training camp. Now, I don't believe he's going to get much playing time at boundary cornerback unless there's an injury, but I am intrigued with him getting more playing time in the big nickel-specific matchup role with tight ends like Travis Kelce. I also remember how effective he was as a blitzer during the Texans playoff game a few years ago. Why do you think the Bills have not used him more in these roles the last few years? I wonder what could have been if he was on the field in the last 13 seconds, jamming Kelce at the line and playing man coverage against him. Side note, I really enjoyed the pod. Side note, I really enjoyed the pod regarding the Bills Wall of Fame snubs. I'm a huge fan of Terrence McGee and actually have a signed jersey hanging on my wall in my Bills bar. He's one of my favorite players all time. Truly appreciated his grit and toughness during his playing days, and he was a true highlight reel anytime he returned to kickoff. He certainly deserves more recognition for being one of the better players during the drought. I'm with you, Michael. I'm here for all the Terrence McGee praise you have to offer. I remember there being a time where I thought the Bills' best opportunity to score a touchdown was Terrence McGee returning a kick. Some bad offenses during that time. So I'm with you there. Siran Neal, let's talk about him for a second. I feel like Siran Neal is a player that I've felt similarly about with you, Michael, where I've kind of waited for him to make a bigger impact on defense. And I even think coming out of that 2019 season, I was talking about Siran Neal as kind of a breakout candidate for the defense. And then it really didn't happen. I kind of whiffed on the take, and I've kind of backed off ever since. Now, I've certainly enjoyed his play on special teams and what he's meant to the team in that regard. And certainly the Bills have rewarded him for that. But I've wondered myself, is there some opportunity here for him to be a matchup-specific player? And I remember being at camp when the Bills practiced in Carolina several years ago. And I remember watching Siran Neal go one-on-one with Greg Olsen and I think Ian Thomas at the time. The Panthers, had different tight ends. I thought he was really good in those moments, and I've just kind of been waiting for him to get a little bit more opportunity on defense. But as it's continued to not happen, I've backed off, right? So that's where I'm at with Siran Neal. And anybody that was listening to this podcast coming out of the 2019 season into 2020 probably remembers me hyping that up a little bit, and then it never really happened. So I think I've been in the same headspace that you are, and I'm hesitant to really call for it because I whiffed on it a few years ago. Last one comes from Mike, who says, does Reggie Gilliam make the team? If you were a Panthers, and he transitions really different here. He goes, if you were a Panthers fan, how mad would you be by letting McDermott and Bean leave your franchise? And I lied. I have one more coming from Matt after this. So yes, I do think Reggie Gilliam makes the team. I think he provides a role that not many people can. He's the fullback, tight end, short yardage back, special teams extraordinaire. I think every team should have a player like this. He doesn't really have any competition for this role. And so I think as a four-face special teamer that can help you in 22 personnel, can play tight end in a pinch, I think he's just so versatile that you would want to keep him around. I think that I'm not going to call him a lock. And I think when you say roster locks, you're talking Stephon Diggs, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Deion Dawkins. Those are roster locks. But in that tier of non-roster locks that you think are going to make the team, I'd put Reggie Gilliam right in that bucket. Your second part of your question was, if I were a Panthers fan, how mad would I be by letting McDermott and Bean leave the franchise? Well, I live in Charlotte, so I've seen this, right? And I'm not sure there's much you can do about it. The Panthers, remember, they were 15-1 in 2015. Went to the Super Bowl, had a great season. Cam Newton's the MVP of the league. And now 2016 was pretty disappointing coming out of that, but at that point you weren't ready to blow it up. You didn't have enough information to move on from Ron Rivera as the head coach. You couldn't after 2016 have said, you know what, this Brandon Bean guy, really like him as the assistant GM. You're going to be promoted to head GM. And also, Ron Rivera, thanks for everything. Appreciate the division titles, the 15-1, the Super Bowl. But this one bad season, we're going to put Sean McDermott as head coach. I don't think they really had it. There's nothing they could do about it. Those guys got promotions, and good on the Pagulas for hiring these people, because obviously it's changed the direction of the franchise. So I look, you wish it were different if you're a Panthers fan, but what could you have reasonably expected, especially, when you were dealing with the Jerry Richardson stuff, right? Look all that up. That was some complicated layers where you really didn't have an owner, an active owner there for a little bit. So things were kind of status quo. Last one, Matt says, do you think we'll ever see a Drive to Survive style series better than Hard Knocks for the NFL? Imagine how amazing it'd be to see a full season of Bills behind the scenes content. Well, first of all, I love the embedded videos, even though they're team controlled content that give exactly the messaging that the team wants you to get, but I still love seeing the behind the scenes stuff. So I'm here for all of that I can get. I don't know that I'm super familiar with Drive to Survive. I think that's the F1 Netflix thing. So I'm not exactly sure what went on there, but I see what you're saying there, like Hard Knocks behind the scenes, Buffalo Bills. I think the Bills will always resist those opportunities, whether it's the Amazon, whatever it's like, I forgot what it's called. They put it out after the season where it's like the Amazon Hard Knocks. There's the in-season Hard Knocks now, the preseason Hard Knocks. I don't see Sean McDermott ever signing up for that. Now, you can be forced into that. But by the way, the Amazon thing, it just came to me, all or nothing. The Bills will never sign up for it. If they're mandated to do it, there's not much they can do. But I think the Bills will always be resistant to anything like that, and they will certainly continue to do their embedded stuff, but obviously controlling everything the way that they want it to be. But I eat up every bit of it that I can, and I'm sure everyone else does. And from a fan's perspective, you'd love to see it. But I will not sit here and predict the Bills to be a team that's ever featured in that stuff. And I know that for Hard Knocks, at least, there's a specific criteria that goes into it. And you, as a playoff team from the year before, you're not even eligible for it. So I guess from that perspective, I don't really want to live in a world where the Bills don't make the playoffs. And so I hope they're never eligible for Hard Knocks. Fun question here to close things out. All right, folks, that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. The Bills will be on the practice field on Tuesday morning. And sometime Tuesday afternoon, I will get you a recap podcast telling you what we learned and any other news that come out of Buffalo Bills training camp. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.